Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Peaceful Mind, where we talk mental health, community, and culture. Today, we are talking about children and we are talking about school going age. Sometimes it's a headache for parents, but we're going to help you ease the headache with our guest that we have today. I also have my co host.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Munira Hoosain. Lovely to be back here again.
And today I'm very excited. We have two people with lots of expertise for today. So firstly we have Habib Kagee, who's an educational psychologist. Assalamu alaikum, Habib, and shukran so much for availing yourself.
Walaikum salam, and thank you for having us.
And then we have Tasneem Abrahams, who's also an occupational therapist. Shukran for making the time.
Afwan, shukran for having me. I'm really excited to start the conversation.
So let's start the conversation. We had a little impromptu chat just before this, and we were talking about children and school going age, and we've been talking about the pressure that children sometimes feel, when already from early ages. But, you being the experts working with this age group, we wondered, where's a good place to start when we're talking about this particular group of children? Where should we start? Where do we start the conversation? What is important?
So I'm not sure who's going to start, Mariam. I think I'll give it
You're
to
free to
Tasneem.
jump. You're free to jump in. Anyone can jump in.
Um, I think if I may, Mariam, as you said, that I'm an educational psychologist, so I work across schools, and I also work within a private practice. So I guess in the work that one do, you see a trend of learners who, you do a lot of assessments and consultations and interventions, and you plan around that. But so if you want to notice the recurring pattern in terms of what we do is that many kids are actually struggling to find that sense that, am I good enough? And so when you find them in your assessments, even parents would bring them, whether it is for extra time assessment accommodations, and we know that that is a big thing nowadays for us. And we're trying to hone in to make sure that, whenever you write an exam, that it is stressful for any child. There's always anxiety that goes in there. So if you can afford it, you will go to the educational psychologist, and then you will have this assessment done so that you can write in a better space. And so again, it comes down in terms of the previous conversation, and I would like to latch on to what Tasneem spoke about, that grade nines, specifically that group as well. But let's hone in on this group that we're speaking about, is that, how am I good enough within this classroom in terms of the expectations of what parents would want of us, and how they would want us to be successful in life, but also having to consider perhaps in terms of what this learner is capable and able to do. And so it is more about not necessarily, let's call it a diagnosis, but it's more about what kind of support do we give them so that they can really bring out their best. I think I'll pause for the Tasneem.
Sure, it seems a lot of pressure for that age. I'm already feeling you saying it like that, but it's so true. But I'm just thinking now, that concept of being good enough. I work with adults, and it comes up a lot with adults, and I'm just trying to think, if an adult struggles with that concept about himself, how does a child navigate that?
I was thinking the same thing, Mariam. We see it in our students at university that they tie the identity to the academic marks.
Mm.
And of course, we're sitting with high performing students who are 90% averages in matric, and then they come to university and they're struggling to pass. But doesn't it start at this age, at that 6 to 12 age, with s- uh, children tying the identity to um, the academic performance, the marks, the reports, how many sevens did I get? I know this is always a thing when they come home. And as much as I tell my kids, let's focus on the behavior and attitude section, it's more important. That's all about how many sevens did I get.
I'm glad you guys brought up the comparison in the age groups because I would add to that that I think that with every generation, um, the leap in maturity increases in terms not maturity as in the individual's maturity, but what is expected of kids younger and younger. And I think that there's the biggest gap we're experiencing now versus when we were kids because we've got that added thing of everything is now in the open, everything is on social media. So what I'm seeing is that before in let's say our generation, we faced the same pressures, but it was very much in a bubble. So you experience these like feelings of incompetence maybe at school versus your peers, but then you go home and you kind of are closed off
I've
from that. So you've got
mm,
respite from feeling that. And you only have the pressures within your home with whatever is value based in your home. But now what's happening is with this age group is that kids are now having access to the internet at a much younger age. Kids as young
mm,
as 6 years old have cell phones and they have TikTok and all of these things. And so what's happening is when they leave that environment of where they have to learn how to manage, these feelings of incompetence, etc. They go home and it follows them. I think that's the issue dealing with is that there is no respite from dealing with these things, that like it's constant in every sphere of their life. So they get it at home in terms of what their parents expect from them. They get it from their peers, which is a completely different set of expectations they have to meet. And then they get the unrealistic, social media, social expectation, which is not even real, but that's what they are exposed to all the time. So there's no escaping it. And I think for me, that is the biggest crisis that we have at the moment in this generation of school-going kids.
you're bringing up social media, and I know this is like a topical issue internationally, and some countries have now said that kids shouldn't be on social media or are not allowed. It's illegal for
They've
kids to be on
banned,
social
yeah,
media. Yes, until the age
at a
of
certain
16.
age.
Yes, and then also kids not being on mobile devices, not being on cell phones until high school age as well. And how do we feel about this? What are our thoughts about that?
So personally, I feel that it's not realistic because I think it's kind of like we do need regulation and guardrails in place, but to completely remove them from the reality of the world is not realistic and not preparing them. So for me, it's kind of like, when you look at discipline, it's like, do you completely isolate your child from what is out there, or do you teach them the skills to manage what's out there? If you think just from like a Muslim parent's point of view, right? Like I've come from a strict household, and then there's varying degrees of strictness from parents. I know of kids right now whose parents are extremely strict. From the outside, they look like these good little Muslim girls, but they get find ways, and because the parents are not open to having this discussion with them, it's actually more dangerous because they can do things without their parents knowing, and there's nobody there to guide them because they can speak to no one. Whereas opposed to if you as a parent take responsibility that, there's certain, like I worked with a triplets, a set of triplet kids. And I was quite impressed with this parent where she was like, they're allowed to have phones, but when they have to hand their phones in a certain time, but they are allowed to have it, and they have got the family link things and the parents. There's no such thing as like your privacy and all of that when it comes to the internet. So they were allowed to have their phones, but there was guardrails around it, and there was discussions around it. Like they would talk about the things that people are talking about social media, and they weren't allowed to have their phones in their rooms. They had to hand it in at night and things like that. So that they're not missing out on the development of learning how to manage themselves and how to manage social media. So I think having like a complete cut off, it's illegal, is not solving the problem. You're putting a plaster on the problem instead of getting to the root of what the issue is. That's just my personal take.
Yeah, I
Habib,
think
you
Yeah,
what
wanted to say something
I,
earlier.
I think I want to add on to what Tasneem is saying. So I guess what we experience is that all of these challenges is really in isolation, right? It always has to do with this kid finding that sense of belonging. Where do I fit in? This kid also having to have the sense of, am I able to do certain things? So it comes back to that thing of success versus failure versus the support structures that we put in. If one reflects on not too long ago, we were all exposed to COVID-19. In that space where we perhaps had a bit of control over social media and the type of devices that we wish to expose our kids to, and we were all very what's that word, like thinking that we are in control. We will only give them a cell phone perhaps when they reach the age of 16 or 17 and 18, and we will be in control of that. And then COVID told us no. Even in grade one, they must have a cell phone all of a sudden because the teacher's going to go online. But what happened in that space? That space then says that we are now part of this bigger world that has absolutely no boundaries now. How do we again teach? How do we again guide and support our kids into a space that has boundaries? Um, I work in a space where it's not normally just your I would call it for the comfort of this conversation, not just in an average type of income, economic, socioeconomic space. You find yourself in underprivileged areas as well. These kids also want to have that cell phone, but do they have access to it? Yes, they do. But how do they have it? Now we come across the question is that, do parents have control over these things? And many cases we also find that your cell phone, especially now we're on holiday period, aren't those like the AI babysitters that we have? Yeah, just keep yourself busy, but there's no control over that. And so it becomes again that information overload. Is a skill able to process that information? Because if you look in terms of the discussion that we're having here right now, it is about not just the kid's success, but are they able to process that information, make meaning of it, and now say, how do I navigate my own success? How do I navigate my peer and my social groups in all of this? Because the challenges are real there for us.
Habib, you're saying that, and I'm just thinking because my son is in grade 3, and they use smart boards in the classroom, and they have like a library um, period where they go and they were taught how to use tablets. And so they get, I mean, from grade 1 already, they had this where they, were familiarized with using technology, and so they do assessments and things on, online. And so he comes home and then he asks if he can use one of my devices to sign into his, they use green shoots to sign into his green shoots. And then I watch him, like, because he knows his username, his password, he's got it written down, and so he signs in, and I look at him and how he was doing these assessments, and so it ties into both of the things we're talking about, the technology side and even the success versus failure, like you were saying, Habib. He's so, like, he's focused, and I mean he's 8 years old, so obviously he's focused on trying to do it so quickly. And so he does it quickly, and then he makes little errors, and then he's very upset when it's not 100%. And so they do it at school, but he came to do it at home so that he could repeat it to make sure he could get 100% for every assessment. And then I went through the questions with him that he got wrong, and I asked, like, what do you understand by the question? And then because he was trying to do it so quickly, also he wasn't, like I say, he wasn't really processing the question properly. And so, he's speeding through, but then he's making these like simple little errors. But for him, the focus is on that 100%.
Yeah.
That he wants to get
Mm,
100% for
mm.
every assessment. And yesterday, I asked him, "Are you still busy with the green shoots?" And he said, "No, I'm ahead of the class. Like, all my things is all on 100%." And I thought, I don't want him to have this idea that, success is that 100%. Because like you say, Munira, it's also about the behavior, it's also about the attitude. It's, how are we treating people, how are we treating our friends, that kind of thing, the sports and things that we enjoy. Even for sports, I'll always say, now, did you enjoy it? Was it, how was the experience? And not, did you win, or did you, which position did you achieve, or anything like that? How do we,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's only 8 years old. There's still a long way for me to go with him. And how do we navigate that?
Yeah. It's tough, eh? Because, I mean, like you said, we see this in adults. We see it in ourselves. We see it in ourselves that, like, we don't want to be focusing on the 100% all the time. We want to focus on the process. We want to focus on the development and all of that. And just tying in with what Tasneem said about the difference between banning social media versus supervised social media. It's again about that kind of involved parenting and supporting and guiding the child, right? So I love what you said, Tasneem, about just because the child has a device doesn't mean that they have privacy, right? And that's something that I practice with my kids as well, because they're actually not safe at 12, 16 years, even at 16 years old. They're not safe to be online on their own unsupervised. And so the child having a device or having a WhatsApp or Instagram account doesn't mean that you should not have access to that. So, and I think sometimes we get so caught up in respecting our kids' privacy that interferes with keeping them safe, especially in online spaces. Um, it's very challenging. It's very challenging. Tasneem and Habib, you guys also spoke about this Habib, I think you spoke about the extra time issue and kids not always learning in the same way and perhaps needing accommodations in the classroom. And I know, Tasneem, this is an area that you spend a lot of time in. Hey, you work with neurodiversity. Is there
Yes,
something you
so
want to
that's
add to
actually
that?
one something. Yes, so that's actually something I wanted to add in relation to also technology and the ban on technology, social media, is that it also just shows like a lot of the regulation, and that is very much um, based on a neurotypical what a neurotypical family would need. But if I think like in the population I work with, the virgin population, um, like the tools that you have access to through internet and social media opens up a whole world to a lot of these kids, but they still need those boundaries and supervision. But then I also wanted to add, something that Habib said around like we using social media as babysitters. That has been through the ages. So when there wasn't social media, it was TV. And now at least there's this other, like just to be devil's advocate, we have this other issue that at least social media opens up to more new, like more opinions and perspectives, which is why you see our younger generation are more like activists in their thinking, and they think they decolonized a lot of them in their thinking, because previously we were still using the TV, whatever, and it was all like these Western type views that were punted at our kids, and our kids are starting to see that there are other opinions out there. So that's the other thing about banning our generations from. It's also a way of controlling like how they see the world and what they compare themselves to. And so our generation, we compared our value and our worth to how close we were assimilated to Western values. Whereas now the new
Mm.
generation are, looking at people from other parts of the world that they would never have been exposed to. So there really needs to be a balance. And if we take from our own religion, the whole thing about moderation, I think that's the key with everything, is that exposure needs to be moderated. But with regards to the neurodivergent community, I just think that we are going to exclude such a big population if we're going to completely just throw the baby out with the bathwater and not kind of look at how do we actually solve the root cause. And it's absolutely what you said, Mariam, around the processing. You mentioned that your child got frustrated when he didn't do it correctly. For me, that is more the lesson that is learned. Like I always say to my kids, when you go to high school, the subjects and that is great, but you forget most of that stuff when you leave school. Actually, what school is teaching you is how to manage the workload, how to manage disappointment, failure, frustration tolerance, emotional stuff that's going on. The content and everything you learn is just the tool and the vehicle that provides all those, you know, challenges you have to face.
Opportunities.
But how do you actually learn how to deal with failure or not knowing or being frustrated because you can't get something right or you're just not getting the maths marks and you have to do all this tutoring, you have to manage your time because there's projects, there's sport, there's all of those are actually the skills, the executive functioning skills, the life skills that are more important to learn at school. Because, like I say to my kids, nobody's going to look at your grade 8 report when you're applying for a job one day. Nobody. Nobody's going to care in grade 7 that you failed that lever arm that you had to make. Nobody's going to care. Like, that's not what's important. You try your best. We give you the support you need, but the skills that you learn around doing that process, that's what's more important.
Yeah. So the support you need, I think, is the thing that people don't always understand. What does that look like for my child? Habib, in your practice, what are the kinds of issues that you see children struggling with, and how do we support them either as parents or in the classroom?
So I just want to latch on to what this name said earlier on, is that the schooling system has been created where, if the child doesn't have a level 7, then you're not successful. So the system itself speaks about your academic or your intellectual success based on a number. And people work towards that particular number because they find that that is their success. And that is that report card that opens the doors for them to many pathways that they wish to follow. However, is it always about just the report card? We've also seen sometimes within our schooling system that, that if I can call it that swear word, the systemic exams, that's coming up. And schools are engaged about around their own systemic. So when they call out for support, they will say, but you know what? Can you please give this child some kind of a diagnosis so that we can exempt them from writing the systemic exams? Because the school is getting um, kind of valued or evaluated around the systemic.
Yes.
But now,
So is
yes,
the
that's the real,
child
that's the
doing the
reality, Munira.
Yes.
So it's not, so if the school is being evaluated for their success, now one can imagine the pressure that teacher is under. Then you imagine what kind of pressure is that learner under. And that is really at the core of it. So now coming back to your question, Munira, is that you will find definitely it has to do with the academic um, strength and the challenges that they go through, whether in reading, whether it's in writing, whether it is in their maths ability. But more importantly, as Munira said, around that social relationships that they also find themselves in. Because I have to show to my friend I'm better than you. But instead of saying to my friend, how can I support you so that we can all be successful one day? And then the important part is as where the conversation really started in terms of how does this impact on that learner's self-esteem? Now we're getting all kinds of anxiety and low confidence that's coming out. It's because they feel that they're not meeting a certain criteria, and we have not guided them and showed them how to, or rather support them to say, this is how you pick yourself up after failure. It's not just about success, but how do we pick you up? Because um, we're all in our own working spaces. Not everything is going to go according to how you've planned it. وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. That comes into play here immediately. So that you plan so much for yourself and you want to do it, but if the outcome is not right, now all of a sudden you feel that I'm not good enough. And who says maybe Allah had a greater plan for you and you're not just patient enough to find that pathway. But how do you pick yourself up to say, okay, let me try the next path that I can find and figure out for myself?
Habib, I'm just I mean I was just based on what Munira asked earlier, I'm just thinking, as parents, sometimes, I mean, all most of us, so we do try to support our children, but sometimes we don't get it right. How can we, or rather, what should we be mindful of when we are trying to provide support, and even those later years, like in high school also? How do we like approach our children, or how do we, when we talk about these things, to make sure that we don't add to that pressure that they are already experiencing, at school? Because I mean, I sometimes, when I'm interacting with friends or with family, and I, speaking to the children and so on, um, you can see the pressure, and I know the parents, and I know it's not intentional, that the pressure is not intentional, that they wish for success of the children, but they're not necessarily wanting to put that pressure on, but they might be putting on a pressure without realizing it. I mean, even for myself, I try to, when I talk to my son's matric this year, so when we talk about things, I try to I try to be mindful of that, but I know maybe times I'm also not getting it right. So what should we be mindful of? And maybe both of you can, from your different perspectives, just how do we navigate that, and how do we try to ease on the pressure? Because I think sometimes we don't. It's not intentional, but it is there.
Yeah,
So I
just
think
to add
that
to that.
I, yeah,
No,
sorry.
go ahead, Tasneem. Go ahead.
No, I think the difficulty is in finding the balance. So I work with teenagers and adults with neurodiversity, and a lot of late diagnosed with ADHD, autism, and the reason why they become diagnosed is because of the transition. So I have a transition from foundation phase to senior phase, from primary to high school, from high school to varsity. And what I find ironically is that the kids that they are quite bright, so they were never picked up academic standpoint. And the reason they picked up is that, ironically, it's the kids whose parents are extra supportive in terms of not in terms of the executive function support. So where they're starting to struggle is not necessarily the intelligence of like passing exams, but managing the workload, forgetting things like planning, all of those things. And they start falling apart because they've come across as very disorganized, and they lose marks because they don't hand in assignments on time, or they forget to do it, or those kind of things. And why I say ironic is because, I mean, your executive functions develop all the way into your 20s, right? And the way that you develop competence, in the primary school age is through doing. As an OT, we know through doing is that you gain the skill. And so parents who are taking over the executive functions of the child by like supporting them, by doing everything, all the planning, organizing, looking at their homework, all of that stuff, are actually denying the child the ability to develop that skill. So for example, and when my kids were like entered into the from foundation to the senior phase, there was this one parent, and it's no slight on her. She was a single parent, so it was also for her own to be able to manage. She was so like desperate to like want to know when is the homework, so that she could tell the children when must you do what, and so that they can keep on top of things. But from my perspective, I'm like, if you don't do your things and you get into trouble, that's part of the learning. I'm not going to police everything because you need to learn. And if I need my support is not to do it for you, my support is then to help you learn the strategy. So if I need to show this kid, because each child is different, if I need to show this kid that you need to use a diary and in class, I mean, with my youngest, I actually had to have a meeting with the maths teacher because he wasn't always doing his maths homework. I had a meeting with him and said, okay, explain to me, how do you give the homework? And he's like, I put it on the board. So I'm like, okay, I need your help to support him, that after every lesson, you need to give the children time to like write down their homework and actually like see that they're doing it. So that's teaching them the skill of a strategy of how do you keep track of what you need to do, or teaching different, like each child is a different thing in my house. My daughter has a whiteboard and she writes things down, things she must remember, what she must pack, all of that stuff. Else she will forget. But if I had to do it for her, she's never going to learn that skill. And so I think when we talk about parent support, it's about distinguishing doing for the child versus working with them to learn the skill to do it for themselves. And so even like now when I'm working with kids who are like 13, 14, I say like the parents or the referring person would ask, like, will you work with the school? And I said, I'll communicate with the school. But for me, at this age group, my role is to teach them self-advocacy, because it's not anymore about going to the school like when they like 6, 7, 8, where advocating for the child and teaching the parent to advocate for the child. You need to now give the child the skill to self advocate, to identify, be aware of what they need, how they need support, and be able to advocate with their teachers. This is what I need, in a mature way, because that's what's going to put them in good stead when they are adults and they're working in a corporate setting or whatever work setting, and they need to be able to work with AR and say what they need and things like that.
Mm.
I think that is such an important point that Tasneem has raised there, is that one has to bear in mind that a learning difficulty does not necessarily equate to a learning disability and about the child's intelligence. It is about how do we put support in place. And Tasneem has so wonderfully described her own kids in terms of the whiteboard and those kind of things. It is sometimes just little things that one has to put into place to make sure that this child can function optimally within that classroom setting, but also then having to be able to have the confidence and go home and still work independently and not just necessarily receiving support all the time. Yes, alhamdulillah, if we have the resources and we find that we can find tutors and different types of programs for our kids to help them and build their confidence, by all means, I'm not saying don't do that. But in schools, it is important that the diagnosis means absolutely nothing if you're not going to have a proper ISP, individual support plan in place to help this child develop not just academically, but also socially, um, and make sure that they have that confidence to do their best. If one looks in terms of neurodiversity, I think neurodiversity is it's so wonderful now. Um, I'm not sure if you guys gonna agree with me that that ADHD that we all spoke about at one stage, and what medication we must take. And I'm not going to mention that medication right now because some people still frown upon it. But you get a lot of adults nowadays that says, I own my ADHD. And that says to you that now we're becoming comfortable by the fact that, yes, I am different.
Yes.
So I think differently, I process differently, and I have certain support structures in place to accommodate myself, whether that is in school and whether that is within in the workspace. So neurodiversity is so wonderful because it does definitely reminds us that we are all different in different ways. And so differences is almost part of our natural human variation, if I can call it that. And so how do I appreciate that? And how do I make sure that I support the learner um, at the space where they find themselves in? Because it borders down into, and maybe the conversation will go that way as well. Now this learner starts presenting all types of different types of behavior.
Mm.
And what is behavior really? Behavior is a symptom that I'm not good. Something is not right here. Now I'm starting to work with the behavior. That's just the band-aid you're putting on. What's the root? Where is this all coming from? And if one touches on those kind of things where the support is really needed, then we'd have a society that embraces these differences and where people are much more comfortable within themselves and wanting to be then successful in their own way and make and become meaningful in their own spaces.
I love what you guys said about the learning differently, not being a failure and not being lesser than, it's we are different. And even though these systemic exams or these, moderated exams test us all in the same way, we may have different ways of learning and different ways of testing. But also with neurodiversity, there are some positive attributes associated with that as well.
Mm.
I mean, I've got a friend who, as an adult, like really struggles with executive function stuff. You know, can't plan, can't organize, is useless with following up on anything, but has won awards for innovation, multiple awards for innovation. Like, is the most creative person. And I'm sure that's something you see in your practice a lot, right, Tasneem?
Yes, so I mean, I have clients who range from 60 medical students to project managers to CFOs, like these are not people who are struggling like on the outside, they don't look like they're struggling, but on the inside, the struggle is real. And I think an analogy I always use when it comes to having a different brain is that I always say, like, when we all love Spider-Man, like Spider-Man is like, especially now the younger character, very endearing. And I always say, like, when Spider-Man first got bitten by the spider and had like the powers, um, those powers, he still needed to learn how to use them and how to direct them correctly. So he had to still learn, like in the beginning, especially when you do the origin story, you would like shoot the webs like all over the place. He was very ineffective as a superhero, even though he had like these skills and abilities. And so when you are neurodivergent, you have to think of it as and as Spider-Man, he also had lots of shortcomings. He wasn't perfect just because he was a superhero. He made mistakes, he misjudged things, like he wasn't perfect. So the if you're neurodivergent, you have to identify what are those special skills and talents you have, but you still need to learn how to use it. And Spider-Man also had supports. He had his aunt, he had Iron Man, he had all these people, he had the special suit. He needed all those things, or he wouldn't be the superhero he ended up being today. But then I also say to them, but then underlying that, what we love about Spider-Man is that if you strip all that away, who he is as a person, his values that his aunt and his that raised him instilled in him, like his humanity. Like he's one of the superheroes in that Marvel thing that is the most like has most in touch with humanity, and that's what makes him a great superhero. Those skills are just what he had to learn in order to like enhance his potential. And it's not just for neurodivergence. I think that goes then as a message for anyone, is that at the end of the day, who you are as a person, what your values, your goals, your aspirations, what you want to achieve in anything is possible if you have the correct supports, if you learn how to use your skills correctly, if you acknowledge and are aware of what your shortcomings are, and be aware of that in how it's going to show up in your day-to-day life. That's what's going to promote your success, rather than whether you have a learning disability or not, or you have a diagnosis or not, or whether you go to private school, public school. Those things are kind of irrelevant. They are just part of the environment and context you have to take into account in what you need to overcome in order to get where you want to go.
Yeah, I guess
Beautiful.
that is so true. Because even in our school sector, again, we emphasize to our teachers that it is not about the diagnosis that you're going to have. It is more importantly to see what support are you going to put in place. So we find that nowadays you have more of your ASD kids that are presenting within your schools, and even in your primary schools as well. And so
Habib, just explain what ASD is.
so I'll get to that part. So in terms of ASD, we're speaking about the autistic spectrum disorder, but then we also have to separate that in terms of autism. So it may sound like the same thing, which it is really, but it is again the clinical diagnosis of the ASD, the autistic spectrum disorder, that clinical diagnosis that you have versus autism traits that you present. I guess we all kind of almost can say we own our ADHD, but somehow we also have these little traits of communication skills and social skills and how we do things differently. So is the diagnosis important for our schools, or is it more the support that we are going to put in place. So if you have a level 1, a level 2, or level 3, um, yes, that is where the clinical diagnosis becomes important. But the importance is more in terms of how do we accommodate, how do we support those learners? Because again, it is about encouraging them in terms of the effort and avoiding that we can't compare them across the mainstream, or even within the families. We compare the one child against the other, but it's more about providing that emotional safety for them to say, okay, this is your needs versus the next person, but together we are all in this, and we can be supportive. So I guess for schools, it is really important to accept the difference and to also differentiate in terms of your curriculum almost, the type of accommodations that you're going to put in place. We have our school-based support teams that becomes involved in this, so that they also understand that your learner that you have is different, but we need to make sure as a school that we also embrace the support that this learner needs. So sometimes psychologists would make the recommendation that they need a read and a scribe perhaps, or they need a separate venue, but some schools can't provide those things for you. So you also have to be realistic in those kind of things. But how do we make the necessary accommodations for our learners in terms of reinforcing their ability to feel that they can do things instead of just lowering their self-esteem and reinforcing rather the inferiority complex that they may develop.
Habib, on that point of
Yeah, can I also
'cause sorry, Nadeem. I just a thought came to mind. We were talking about the self-esteem of the learners, and we've been talking about difference, and difference does not mean disability, does not mean failure. And you spoke earlier about just our peers, and how instead of supporting each other, we rather trying to compete. Is competitiveness, are we seeing more of that, in schools these days? And is that contributing to how learners, how they see themselves if there is a struggle, not necessarily in terms of neurodiversity or anything like that, but if there is any kind of struggle, because again, not just with neurodiversity, just in general, we are different, we do things differently, and unfortunately, we have a system that evaluates us all in the same way, even though we might not learn, and make meaning in the same way. But are we seeing more competitiveness in schools? I think of technology and I think of social media, and we definitely see it there. But are we seeing it in the schools as well? Is it contributing to these experiences?
So Mariam,
I
I
think it
guess.
is.
Yeah, okay. You carry on, Tasneem. You can carry on.
No, I was gonna say I think it is, but I think competition it's healthy to have competition and for children to want to compete and be the best, compete against themselves, compete against others. I think the issue isn't the competitiveness; it's what is rewarded and seen as value. So when you look at, say, certain schools will award, like, say, prefectship, for example, to someone by default if they are the top academic and they're very sporty, irrespective of whether they have leadership skills. As opposed to, you might have a child who's an average student who participates in everything, not like first, but excellent leaders. And so I think the issue is then the children are competing on the wrong metrics. Like you're using the wrong metric of success to show what is valuable, as opposed to identifying the unique value that everyone brings. In the same way, some schools are solely focused on sport and a very specific sport. And then all the other sports, you can be going overseas and representing the country, but if you didn't play rugby, then you're not, you're not good enough. Only the rugby jocks are the ones who are like put on a pedestal. Or if you, or for example, schools that focus on schools and they don't give enough credit to the culture. Maybe you are an excellent public speaker, debater. Maybe you are excellent at coding and you're going to innovate. And you see then years down the line, you have that child is the one who is like sitting as a CEO of a major technology company, but they were not valued for their contribution in school. So that's why I'm saying within each individual code that you're doing, by all means, there must be competitiveness. It must bring out the best, but also that thing of like in your post about you can be collaborative and competitive. For example, I'm currently in an award category with another person in the same as me, and we're going to be sitting at the table together, cheering each other on, even though technically speaking we're competition. You can compete and collaborate at the same time. That's what we need to teach our children. What is the value? What are you attaching value to? And that's where the child develops their self-esteem based on what metric you are measuring.
Yeah. Shukran, colleagues. We are obviously all very passionate about the topic, but we do need to close off now. I want to ask you just to share your final pearl of wisdom, like a 30-second, either a highlight from what we've spoken about today, light bulb moment, or a final word that you want to leave with our listeners.
I guess from my side, Munira, again, thank you for allowing us the space to speak and to share our thoughts around the topic. Um, again, just to add on to what Tasneem has said, is that competition is healthy as long as you
Mm,
compete with yourself. So one of the things that we do in our office is that, because we work with, call it, your vulnerable kids, and those kids that really need support, we celebrate every little win that they achieve. And it's not necessarily what the school wants, but we measure what the support that they need, and we celebrate their wins for them. Okay. And sometimes it is about just taking a picture and putting it up there and say, wow, see how this child has developed. So I guess in my closing remarks is that we are just not supporting children academically, but we are helping them develop a belief in their own, call it, in their own capacity,
mm,
which stays for them beyond the classroom, beyond the institution, because at the end of the day, it is those kids that will reach their own success wherever they find themselves. So our job is to support them to the best of our ability and help them to reach their potential.
mm.
Thank you.
Shukran, Habib. Yeah. Tasneem?
I think from me, I would like to have a message for the parents and the teachers, and then for the children themselves. Um, for parents and teachers, I will take out of Dr. Green's words, which is that children will behave when they can. So, there's the move from, we all say, oh, they're just looking for attention. They're just like, it's attention seeking. But that's not very helpful language. You have to ask, what is the function of the behavior? So is there a skill this child is lacking that's causing them to behave this way? That's more helpful, because if we can identify what is the missing skill and focus on how do we teach them or give them the tools, then that's a more helpful framing than just disciplining because they're just being attention seeking. So that's
Mm,
from the parent child. Like, ask yourself, what are they not able to do that's causing them to behave this? What is the function of their behavior? And then the second, then to the children, I think my key message would be is that the only thing that is constant is change. The world is evolving. You can change your mind. Nothing that is happening right now is a definitive projection of what the future is going to be. Any decisions and choices and failures and mistakes and successes you make now will be can be completely turned around 360 degrees if that's what you choose to do later in life. So the pressure you shouldn't feel pressure on doing everything right now. What you should focus on is developing the skills, learning to be comfortable with yourself, learning, identifying what your unique talents are, just identifying who your unique Spider-Man, like, alter ego is. What is it that you want to, what difference is it that you want to make in the world? What impact? And I think especially in our current world of influence, influence is like a big thing. It's always what the impact you make is far greater than any influence you can have on other people. So always ask yourself, how do I want to show up in this world in a way that is going to make a positive impact in the people around me, in my community, in society, on social media. What is this positive impact that I want to make? And that you revolve your esteem and your skills and everything around that impact that you want to make.
Shukran,
Wow.
Tasneem. Mariam, anything from you?
No, it's been such an interesting conversation, and I think I really like that we had input from yourself, Habib, as an educational psychologist, and from yourself, Tasneem, as an OT. I think just looking at it from these two different lenses has been so insightful. I've certainly walked away with a lot of, things that you've been saying. I'm thinking about my own children, how to approach things. So, I'm sure it's going to have the same kind of impact on our audience. So, shukran again for availing yourselves. I know that you guys are very busy people. It took us a while to find time, but alhamdulillah, shukran so much, really, for availing yourselves and for sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah.
Shukran.
Shukran. I also just want to add that I think the thing that I loved the most about today's conversation was this idea that we need to help our children discover who they are and discover their strengths and discover their way of being in the world. I love this thing about the superhero. And it actually just reminded me, this is a conversation I used to have with my own kids. What superhero, or not what superhero are you, but what is your superpower? This is something I would often say, oh, wow, you're really good at that. Is that your superpower? And that's maybe a language that we can possibly use with our children if it works for us. Again, shukran for your time. It's been really valuable to learn from your years of experience in your professional practice, but also as parents. And we wish you all of the best in your practices and with your own families. May Allah bless you and increase you and grant you barakah in everything that you do. Shukran for your time again, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam.